Well, hello and welcome to the Macquarie Street Political Podcast. It's great to have your company this afternoon. We're live streaming and also going to our podcast audience in the lead up to this ANZAC Day. I thought it would be great to speak with someone who I really respect and admire and who is very knowledgeable about this most sacred of our days on the national calendar. And that's my friend Barry Rodgers, OAM, who is the founding director of Emu Gully Adventure Education at Helidon, near Toowoomba in Queensland. It's a facility which teaches the ANZAC values of courage, mateship, perseverance and sacrifice to tens of thousands of young people every year. It's a fantastic facility. Barry was the principal of Hillcrest Christian College near Melbourne, and he has also had vast experience in business. He organised the 100th anniversary reenactment of the ANZAC charge of Beersheba back in 2017, and he's heavily involved with the Australian Light Horse Association. Barry Rodgers joins me now. Barry, welcome to the Macquarie Street Political Podcast.
Great to be with you, Lyle.
Barry, just tell us a little bit about your interest in ANZAC Day. We've heard a little bit in the introduction about your professional interest, but why have you been fascinated for so much of your life in this, as many Australians are, but you've taken a peculiar interest and taken it to a place where you're able to share that spirit of ANZAC with so many young people every year?
Well, some of it I can explain, and it's probably some of it I can't, Lyle, but I was a war baby, and I still have memories of Spitfires droning across the sky. I remember their last flight before they were replaced by Vampire jets. My father was in the war. We still had ration books for some items, and my uncle was in the war. And I remember as a youngster, probably first grader, being taken to a film, I think it was The Sands of Iwo Jima, a John Wayne movie. And I was quite impressed by it, to say the least. And when I went to school, now the principals asked me the question, "What do you want to be when you grow up, Barry?" And I said, "I want to be a GI." And they said, "Well, that's an American soldier. We have ANZACs." And then I want to be an ANZAC. So, I don't know where it started, but there's just something there that just resonated with me, Lyle.
Mm-hmm. And was ANZAC, you said you were a war baby, and so you grew up obviously in the wake of World War II, but of course ANZAC became famous at Gallipoli in World War I and through France, etc. Was ANZAC Day such a big thing in your growing up years as it is now?
Oh, yes, very much. I can remember seeing parades in the very early days with a few soldiers out in front, and the commentators saying, "Well, the old Boer War veterans, they're fading fast, aren't they?" Well, they're gone. The World War I veterans are gone, and most of the World War II veterans are gone. And the next on the list is the Vietnam era veterans. Not that I went to Vietnam, but I was in the military during the conflict.
Right. Just tell us about that, Barry. You were were you a Nasho doing national service? What was the nature of your involvement in the military?
Well, I was brought up in a cult, actually, exclusive brethren, where they were pacifists and you weren't allowed to do anything in terms of joining the military. So as soon as I left there, the first thing I did was when I was at university, I joined a university regiment. I was there for a couple of years, and very, very formative years for me personally.
Yeah. So just casting our minds back now to the origins of ANZAC, which was at Gallipoli, of course. Thousands of young Australians signed up to this conflict on the other side of the world. Most had never heard of the Dardanelles or Turkey. What was the context of Australia's involvement in that then, of course, led to us having ANZAC Day as part of our national psyche?
I guess we were very much attached to the motherland in those days, England, and we wanted to come to her rescue, as it were, and deal with the issues. A lot of course, went out of a sense of adventure, I guess, rather than any purpose to right any wrong, although that was there as well.
And so what happened then for perhaps those who aren't, quite au fait with the history? I think all of us like a bit of a refresher at this time of the year as the nation comes to celebrate Anzac Day. What happened on that peninsula in Gallipoli that really captured the minds of the young nation?
Well, we stormed ashore at Gallipoli early in the morning on the 25th of April. And we had to, first of all, there was a mistake of navigation. And instead of landing on a beach where there was gentle slopes up, we landed on these cliffs, in front of these cliffs. And I've been up these cliffs, and they're hard to just get up these cliffs, let alone without a pack and a rifle on your back. And of course, let alone without somebody firing at you. So I've been up there with military people looking down on the slopes, and I remember one guy, he was a captain, just looking down and just shaking his head and saying, sheer folly, sheer folly. It was just slaughter coming up. We lost 2,000 on the first day, 2,000 casualties on the first day.
And you've been there many times, as you said, and looked at the graves there. I know one of the graves you've looked at has the name Shelton on it, and I was always grateful for the photographs you sent back.
Well, he came, William Haswell Shelton, I think if I remember rightly, came ashore the first day, and somewhere his remains lie in that peninsula. His body was never recovered. Probably 40% of all those who were killed in World War I, their bodies were never recovered, blown to bits or buried or whatever, and their names engraved on a memorial wall, and at Gallipoli it's at Lone Pine.
Yeah, and William Haswell, for our audience, was my grandfather's half-brother, my great uncle, and died at the age of 21, a young farm boy from Mergen in Queensland, like so many other farm boys and city boys from all over Australia. Anzac Day, when did it sort of first enter into the nation's consciousness, and when did it start to be recognised and commemorated?
Well, it caught on very quickly. One of the army chaplains saw the significance of that day, and our great poet Banjo Patterson wrote that wonderful poem, "We're All Australians Now," and I think it was within a year or two of the end of World War I, ceremonies were starting to be held all over the country, and that just took off.
And that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that poem, "We're All Australians." So Banjo Patterson quickly picked up on the fact that this really had forged our national identity, only being a very new nation, some 13 or 14 years of age since Federation.
Yes. And even today, most historians and sociologists would make the analysis that there's probably nothing that shaped our culture more than what war has, particularly the First World War. And occasionally we see that surfacing in times of trials. I remember during the floods of 2011, there were scores, hundreds of Queenslanders going out with mops and buckets and brooms to help clean up the mess of their fellow Australians, most of whom they had never met. And the Courier Mail had headlines, "The Anzac spirit is in action."
Yeah.
So it is deep in our psyche, Lyle, this whole idea of mateship and looking after your mates, and it gets neglected, unfortunately. And unfortunately, the progressive left are determined to diminish the value of Anzac Day and the legacy that the Anzacs have left us of courage, sacrifice, mateship, endurance. Those are foundational values to build a life on.
Yeah, values very much forged in extreme difficulty and loss of life. Why do you think the so-called progressive left are trying to diminish Anzac Day? What's behind that push?
I don't think they like what it represents. We live in a very multicultural kind of society, and people get confused about their origins and their roots. I remember a major general speaking at a Anzac service, and he was asked the question, I think this might have been a television broadcast. He was asked the question, why do young people turn up in their thousands, hundreds of thousands, to dawn services every year? And he paused for a bit, and then he made a remarkable comment, I thought. He said, I think it's because they see in the ANZAC story a set of values and a sense of meaning that they can't find anywhere else.
So that's why it still resonates today, because it does provide that.
Yeah.
Well, how do you think that has been passed on? Is it through commemorating and observing ANZAC Day itself, or is there something else that helps pass that down through the generations? The fact that here we are, over 100 years later, and it still has deep and abiding meaning for our nation each year.
It's a very interesting question, and I don't know the answer to it, Lyle. It's just crept up on us, and it's certainly not because of any legislation or great marketing programs to get the ANZAC days going. It just happens organically, as it were, and it's quite profound. And it's interesting. I think historians say that you learn a lot about the culture of a nation by the kind of monuments that they have. And when you think of what monuments are prevalent in our country, in pride of place in every little country town, are those statues, those monuments to those who served in the Great War and in World War II and other wars. It's central to who we are as Australians in many ways.
It's extraordinary. You've given a large part of your life to transmitting those values of courage, loyalty, mateship, perseverance, endurance, etc. Why do you feel it's important to pass that on to the next generation? And how do young people respond when you communicate these values to them?
Well, there is a sense in which I feel we owe a debt to those who have paid the supreme sacrifice. And of course, those values are values that stand for themselves. And I find that young people respond extremely positive to the ANZAC story, and it just resonates with them. I often ask students, what's Australia Day about? And what's ANZAC Day about? Now, it's quite interesting because I get a variety of answers on Australia Day, everything from when Captain Cook discovered Australia to the landing of the First Fleet to the inevitable Invasion Day scenario to sometimes no idea whatsoever. But they all seem to know what Australia Day is, ANZAC Day is about.
And that must give you great encouragement seeing that response. What does it tell you, I think, about the next generation coming forward? Often they get a bit of a bad rap because, we've enjoyed the post-war prosperity. My generation, the generation after me, has enjoyed great prosperity and opportunity. What's your sense of the next generation of young Australians coming through?
Well, I feel positive, Lyle, in the sense that if the chips are down, I think they'll rise to the occasion again. And there's some great young people that I've seen go through, faced with adversity, with the objectives that we and trials and tribulations that we put in front of them in our course. And you can see those values of courage and mateship coming to the surface. So, given the right atmosphere, I think we can, but they're under threat. There's no doubt about that. And those values of freedom that our ANZACs fought for are under threat, severe threat.
What do we need to do to make sure we don't lose those values?
Well, I think it's important that we keep doing the kind of things that you're doing, like having podcasts and keeping the story alive. And I think we have to also look at our whole educational system, Lyle, and start reintroducing the story of the ANZACs, and particularly the what happened in the Middle East. It's Middle East campaign has been overshadowed by Gallipoli and the Western Front, and understandably so. But in terms of the geopolitics and what was achieved in that campaign, it surpasses anything that happened on Flanders Fields or on the Gallipoli Peninsula. And as Prime Minister Netanyahu said at the 100th anniversary celebration I had the privilege of being involved in, he said the ANZAC's victory at Beersheba opened the door for the Jewish nation to re-enter the stage of history. And Sarkozy of France said some years back that the formation of the modern state of Israel was the most central event of the 20th century. And there's quite a deal of prophetic significance, I might even suggest, about that victory. Winston Churchill made the comment in his books on the First World War. He said, from the uttermost parts of the earth, men and ships are gathering together in the Eastern Mediterranean to fulfill a destiny as yet unknown by mortal man. That's an amazing statement. And when Turnbull gave his speech, he said the ANZACs made history and fulfilled history. And I don't know whether he really knew what he was talking about, but that sense of fulfilling history is quite profound. And the world was changed forever when the Ottoman Turks were defeated at Beersheba.
Yeah, I'm really glad you raised that. And of course, in the background behind you is a poster on your wall of the 100th anniversary commemoration, which was back in 2017. But you're quite right to say that has been overshadowed by Gallipoli, and of course, in recent decades, there's been a big focus on France, which had sort of faded from memory with the focus on Gallipoli back when I was a boy growing up in the 70s and 80s, and then France sort of came into our better understanding because of the sheer scale of the loss of life there. But you organised, but the Palestine campaign is less well known, and the creation of modern Israel that resulted. But you organised that 100th anniversary of the charge of Beersheba, and a lot of people don't know much about that. Just tell us about the charge, because that paved the way to the defeat of the Ottoman Turks, and of course, as you say, ultimately history for the Jewish nation being fulfilled.
Yeah. Well, the Ottoman Turks had been in control of that whole region for 400 years and were strongly entrenched. And they had a line called the Gaza-Beersheba line. And our first thought was to push up through Gaza along the coastline, which is easier going. And we were defeated in 2 battles at Gaza with severe casualties. And then General Chetrode came up with this plan to go around through the desert and sneak round the back door, as it were, instead of trying to come in the front door. Now, the desert in the Negev, we've traveled through it. I've been through it a number of times. It's harsh, it's hot, it's freezing at night and boiling during the day. And the Germans and Turks did not think that we could get mounted troops around that way. But they didn't take into account the hardy whaler horse that had been born and bred in the Australian outback that took our troops around this impossible terrain and came in from the southeast in behind them, as it were. And we were running out of daylight, and we were pinned down by a Tel, the old Tel Beersheba. Turks had
what's a Tel, Barry? What's a Tel?
Tel is a city that's been built, mostly mud brick houses and such like, and then they collapse and they just clear it and they build on top of it again. And then after another 100 years, it seems to fall apart and they seem to want to build on top of that again and build on top of that again. And can reach, I think the Tel at Beersheba might have been 50, 60 metres high, but it gave a commanding view over the battlefield, and we had to take that Tel before we could charge across the plain. And the New Zealanders were instrumental in taking that Tel. And that's one thing I need to say is we often forget about the NZ part of ANZAC and the New Zealand troops fought alongside us with great distinction, and they took that tell. And we were running out of daylight. Normally, we weren't cavalry. We were mounted infantry. We used our horses just for mobility to get into place. And then the number 3 person in the 4-man section would take the horses back to safety, and the rest would go forward on foot like normal infantry. Well, we were running out of time. We had to get into Beersheba and take those wells before the Turks had destroyed them. Otherwise, it would have been a military disaster. So we charged with our bayonets, and quite a miraculous charge. We only lost 32 men killed in that charge. It's quite miraculous.
That was out of what, about 800 horsemen?
About 800, only 32 went down, and about 3 times that were wounded. But we captured the town. Captured
the town of Beersheba, and that paved the way for, another year of fighting to eventually march into Jerusalem.
Yeah. The final straw came when they tried to make a bit of a stand at a little village called Samark at the southern end of the Sea of Galilee. And they even reinforced it with the Turkish with German stormtroopers to try and hold a bit of a line and preserve as much of the Ottoman Empire as they could. And it was interesting that we were reinforced by Aboriginal troopers. And the 11th Light Horse Regiment, part of them was known as the Queensland Black Watch. And they fought with tremendous distinction at Samark, and we broke through and took the old railway station at Samark. Wow. And that was the end. I think it was 7 days later we were in Damascus.
Incredible, Barry. We could talk all day about this, but thanks for enlightening my audience on why ANZAC Day is so important, but also this neglected part of the campaign. And I remember reading the Desert column as a younger man, and Ian Idris's story, and I think he went to Gallipoli, and then I think maybe France, or maybe not France, but he then came back and fought the Palestinian campaign as well.
Yeah, so, he was at Beersheba. He was a forward observer.
That's right. Ian Idris, great Australian author. But so many of those guys had already been fighting for, they've been through Gallipoli, France, and then they were up through Palestine. That was a pretty torrid time. But it's great to get your insights and wisdom, Barry. What will you be doing this ANZAC Day?
I'll be marching with the light horse. I'll probably be dismounted. I don't bounce well anymore, but we'll see. And we'll have a small contingent of Indigenous troopers with us, representing the Queensland Black Watch. And Helidon, it's a delightful little country town. And after we've had most of the town will turn out to the ceremony. The school will have their little band and marching around, and the whole community gets involved. And afterwards, we go back, and the women put on a delightful morning tea for us. It's a wonderful day.
It's awesome. Well, everyone should get out to the ANZAC Day dawn service and celebrations. I'll be in New Zealand for ANZAC Day this year for the first time. And I'll be looking forward to seeing the NZ part of ANZAC. And thanks for bringing that to our remembrance. I'll be at Whangarei, just north of Auckland, and I'll be thinking of those New Zealanders who charged the tell at Beersheba. So Barry Rodgers, OAM, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your insights on ANZAC with us for the Macquarie Street Political Podcast.
Absolute pleasure, Lyle.